Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein for Interior Design, The New Freedom. Today we'll be talking to Sarah Tomerlin Lee, a leader in the field of hotel interior design. She has recently completed her 33rd hotel project and is working on 7 hotels in New York at this very time. What makes her even more unusual is that while she has long been known as a magazine editor and an advertising executive, it wasn't until 10 years ago that she ever designed a public space. Sarah, that is really quite astonishing. What made you decide to take that leap? What gave you the courage to change careers?
Well, my husband had a terrible accident and died, and he was under contract to finish a hotel in Toronto, at that time called the Inn on the Park, across from City Hall, and I was his vice president. I was just a vice president to sign his checks when he was out of the country, but they didn't realize that. He had a very good staff, and I had to complete the contract. However, we were starting with the Rye-Town Hilton, and I did tell the Hilton Corporation that I didn't want them to be chivalrous. If they didn't trust me, I would tear up the contract.
Well, what would give them the courage to trust you as an instant designer?
I don't know what happens to make people change their mind, but somebody said something at that meeting, because they had said they were going off and have lunch and come back and tell me what they decided. But someone spoke to them in our group, and they turned around, took their coats off, and said, "We're going to teach you what we know."
And they did.
And they did.
Was it difficult to make the transition?
I was very nervous on the first job, I think, but I had a wonderful cooperative staff, and I had Tom's staff. It's not such a miracle.
I think you're too modest. How does your office function?
Well, we have 4 major designers, and myself, who goes around. Each one has a very expert architectural draftsman, and we have people behind them so that we get things done on time and have time to have concepts and think in a different way about every project. You know, we're not that rushed.
33 hotels sound like a lot of hotels.
Well, it's been 10 years. And when we say 33, it doesn't mean that we've done the whole hotel, for instance, with the Palace. We did not do the bedrooms.
You are a genteel Virginia girl, majoring in Latin and Greek.
Right.
Now, what about that prepared you for a career either in publishing and what a career in publishing, the editor-in-chief of House Beautiful, the managing editor of Harper's Bazaar, the beauty editor and the copy editor of Vogue, and a career in advertising and merchandising, not only as the vice president of Lord & Taylor, but I guess the consultant both to Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden. That's another neat trick of yours. Well, what in this background of yours ever prepared you for that kind of career?
I think my father. My father was a wonderful merchant, and he had no idea about this women's lib problem. He believed in women, always. And he thought, you know, if you really were thoughtful, creative, you could accomplish anything. My husband taught me a great deal. None of the men in my life have had any qualms about believing. I think that's been the lucky thing in my life. My sons believe in me, and my family.
In studying and learning about your life and your work, I've often thought that the very first expression of your interest in design was what you did for Elizabeth Arden.
Almost everything I've ever learned, I'm able to use now.
Were there any of the other ideas that
Even
you've
the
helped?
Latin.
How have you used the Latin?
We found it under, up in the ceiling of the bar, what is now the bar at the Palace. One rainy afternoon we peeled off something and there was Seneca. And there was a marvelous quotation. I couldn't quite make it out, so I sent it down to my Latin teacher in Rappahannock, Virginia, Miss Willie True Weathers. She sent me a perfect translation, and the next day wrote me and said, "Seneca made a mistake in Latin."
What did he say?
Well, it was about, the same old business about your own self be true. And it just was paraphrased by Shakespeare, really.
Well, there are a number of phrases that you've added to our language, and I'm especially thinking of one that you did when you were an advertising copywriter. There have been a number of those, and perhaps you'll tell us about them.
Well, I had a lovely time in advertising. One of the funny, I analyzed women in bathing suits one time when I had the Janssen account. It seemed to me that the time when most people are under greatest exposure and trusting about 3/4 of a yard of material. First I wrote a headline called just wear a Janssen. And then I thought that's miserable. I will say just wear a smile and a Janssen. And that ran for years, I must say. And we did little smiles on lorgnettes for fashion shows and things. It's always nice if you can make whatever you think of step out of a page and become like the tiger in your tank. I didn't think of that, but you know, this
you
kind
would
of
like
thing.
to.
I wish I had.
In all of those jobs of yours, which has been the most gratifying?
I think this last one probably, because it just was a dream, you know, and very few people, I think, in the world have a dream in 3 dimensions and have it come true.
We will hear a great deal more about the Parker Meridian, a new hotel on 57th Street in Manhattan that has an extraordinary atrium-like entranceway. Can you tell us something about the design and your intent there?
Well, that whole design came out of as a handicap because the space to the 57th Street side, it's the site of the old Great Northern, is only 18 feet wide and 100 feet long. And
what do you do with 18 feet that creates any presence or anything on a street as demanding as 57th?
The real lobby, of course, is 56th Street. But knowing that everybody would want to say 57th Street, I adopted the handicap. And it seemed to me, since it was just a narrow space between 2 very tall buildings, that we would lift the ceiling as high as we could. I kept thinking about what I'd ever seen that was really a long, narrow room. And I felt the most exciting one was the university library in Dublin. And I remember seeing Kenneth Clark on television going through the library in the Vatican. And his comment to the audience, one wonders if man has ever had a really great idea in an enormous room. And he turned and he walked right down this narrow room until he was about this big. Now
They gave you a great idea, though.
Well, I knew 100 feet wasn't the Vatican Library. I also was thinking about the Palladian Theater, which I had seen with my husband, and the tremendous foreshortening of the way that was built so that people became so small. I realized that if you were walking down that long corridor, you might be coming the other way. So we couldn't do any tricks of perspective. But we could have I just lifted the ceiling up 54 feet, which is 6 stories. And we have enormous windows that reflect to infinity all the way down. We have a beautiful marble floor. We have a beautiful ceiling painted up there, and we have it lighted for daylight with splashy leaves and for moonlight after 6 o'clock.
Is there color involved in that lobby as well?
I haven't quite decided on that. The color in the lobby, in the front lobby, is apricot and pale peach and beige and cornelian. And it just looks fine.
From what I understand, your son, Todd Lee, an architect based in Cambridge, helped you design that lobby space. Is Todd one of your secret weapons?
He definitely is. When I have a real problem, I hop on a plane, or he hops down, and he can draw like Da Vinci. He really can.
That's a mother for you.
That's right. Excuse me for my enthusiasm. But he helped us a great deal with the canopies at the palace. He moved the front of the facade of Sheraton Center out on the sidewalk and gave us all those lovely places for breakfast. He kind of simplified that Eskimo modern front that was on that hotel, so it's really respectable. And he put in the fountain and that lovely effect in the middle of the New York Hilton, which we call Sybil's.
The discotheque.
Discotheque. And I said I wanted water to flow over the greenhouse, and he said, "Mother, if you want a torrent, you shall have it."
I understand you have another son who is also one station removed from being an assist to you.
He is my legal advisor, and I'm proud of that.
He is a lawyer.
He's a lawyer here. And Mother, why don't you read your contracts more carefully? You know that.
Does he do that for you?
Yes.
Why don't we talk about hotel design in general for a moment?
All right.
What, besides the obvious difference in scale, is there that is different between a hotel and an apartment? And actually, I guess what I'm asking you is, what's the difference between private decorating and contract decorating?
Well, it's a difference in perception of the person you're doing it for. I never know who's coming for dinner. Whereas if I was decorating for somebody who was going to it would be their house, of course you know what. I have to just imagine who's coming, what the level is, what their tastes are.
Well, let's take one project. How do you start? And how do you determine what it's going to look like, both in terms of decor, design, spirit, furniture, color, lighting, cost?
Well, you usually have your cost given to you. I mean, you know that this is this big a job, and this is just going to be this many rooms and this height. And you discover whether it's going to be in the center of town or be a country inn.
Well, should a hotel design, or any interior design for that matter, use historical forms literally? How far do you go, and where do you do your research?
Oh, everywhere. You know, it's actually the people up the Hudson were very helpful with me with Tarrytown. And with the Palace, we had two historians who came along with the job.
Architectural historians.
Yes, who were simply superb. We do a lot of research for any job, and we get it from the public library and the Historical Society. We don't do everything that's historical.
Well, do you think that the current trend in architecture and in design in general towards historic preservation and historicism itself has a real implication for interior design? Will we see more of that?
Oh, I do think so. There's so many really wonderful craftsmen still, as I discovered with the Palace. We found people who did absolutely marvelous plaster work. We found a man that could make the bronze stairway that was just superb. We found a man that could make a chandelier. He'd been saving his rock crystal for years for the great chandelier. It's just superb.
And he was able to create this?
Yeah, he did. Absolutely. He made the beautiful torchairs and the chandeliers. It was very thrilling to work with these people.
Well, we're not talking about any usual hotel project. When you talk about the Palace Hotel in New York, it is a 51-story tower that rises behind one of New York's celebrated 19th century landmarks. It is a palazzo designed by McKim, Mead and White. Yes. That is a U-shaped grouping of brownstones. And you are responsible for the restored sections of the what is referred to as the Villard House wing, and the public rooms within the Villard houses as well. How did that assignment come about, and what were the most rewarding aspects of having that kind of assignment?
Well, it just was a dream, you know. I couldn't believe we really were going to do it, because almost everything that you'd want to do, you could do.
How'd you get the job?
I think, truly, Mr. Helmsley remembered my husband very well, who did the Park Lane, and was very complimentary about Tom. And various people in the industry kept saying, write Mr. Helmsley, write him. He hasn't found a designer yet. I really have never made a presentation since the first job. So it was a hard letter.
What did you say?
Oh, no. I said, you know, that I told him what jobs we'd done, and
of your own background in historic preservation.
No, I don't think I mentioned that. No, I phoned him, and then I heard him say, well, it wasn't time. I was early. The architect kept saying he wanted us right away, or wanted a designer. He didn't say us. And then I heard Mr. Helmsley's voice at the time. I heard tell her it was a damn good letter. And it does help to have been a writer. Then I went to see him with my samples, and he said, I've seen that. I like that very much. Well, I didn't like that at all. We went through, and finally he closed the book and said, what have you ever done that's remotely like what I have in my mind?
What had you ever done?
And I said, nothing, nor has anyone else. And what made me so bold, I said, no, nothing. And he said, well, I guess you better do it. I think probably everybody was trying so hard to get it, you know.
Well, I assume that one of the things that you were striving for there was a kind of old world elegance.
Well, those were really, they are rooms that can't be changed. They just had to be waked up. I remember when I was in college going to Williamsburg the first time, and they told me that the reason they put their money in Williamsburg was because it was a sleeping beauty. They could kiss it and it would come to life. You can't do that in New York, they'd say. Well, this has been true of the Villard houses.
What were the goals you were striving for in the Palace Hotel, and do you think you managed to achieve them?
Not entirely, no.
Why the Palace, and how have you reinforced that theme in your design?
Well, it looks like a palace because there's so much marble and there's so much inlaid mosaic, and the floors are all inlaid. I mean, at first I was embarrassed with the name Palace, but as I look at it and see it now, polished and shining, I think it is a palace. If you're the designer, all you really should do, I think, in a place like the Palace is respect the treasure.
Well, you have done that. How do you feel, on the other hand, about waking up and knowing that you're in a Sheraton or a Hilton? Or do you think that hotel rooms should be anonymous?
I think you should always know where you are when you wake up. I don't mean that I think you should have a picture of Fifth Avenue looking at you, but I think if you can imply somehow that you are in the East or in the South, or it's wonderful. I think if everything is the same, it's a miserable trip. I think that's part of the pleasure of travel, is to find characteristics of the place where you are.
How do you feel about the design of country inns?
You can relax and get the countryside in. You can somehow do lovely doorways and have terraces with flowers planted, and everything reflects. I think you can. Certainly in Tarrytown, we moved the wall out into the rose garden where the dining room is, and it's just lovely now. And in Rye, we have a beautiful pool, but an outside pool, and we planted a path, for a strawberry path, and invited people, and a violet path. You know, if you just take a little bit more trouble to make everybody have a lovely time, they do.
I wonder if we can spend a moment just talking about statistics. For example, I assume a lot of design, particularly in hotels, takes its shape and form from statistics. For example, the numbers of travelers that are male, the amount of square footage. I mean, how do you make a room, for example, traveler-proof? What are the rules for hotel design that you've learned from all of these statistics that include, I assume, the cost of an electricity bill?
Well, that is especially true in corridors where the lights never go out. We saved $2 million in one Hilton by changing, unhappily, to fluorescence. But because that's a glow, that's simply there. It's not a light sparkle, you see. However, that's worth it. Now, we do heavy vinyls that look very elegant and don't tear or mar. We know we have a certain loss because lots of travel. If you really equated your traveler and thought about them, you wouldn't think much of the human race, really. I try not to think about this. But you know, you must have pictures bigger than a suitcase. You must be careful about your bedspread. It must be impossible to put it in a garment bag. Now that's shocking, isn't it?
It seems to me that in the past several years, perhaps 5 or so, hotel executives have discovered the fact that there are women travelers. Everything isn't brown anymore.
No, that was my terrible problem when I started. It was as though we were supposed to do insides of cigar boxes. And they'd say 80% of the travelers are men. Now, before my time, Hilton had the idea that there were some women executives. And I think you'd be interested that they did a floor called Lady Hilton. And after Lady Hilton, and after just a few months, they discovered that men were coming in asking for Lady Hilton rooms, because they'd been there and it was more like home. Those rooms had a little prettier curtains, and they had softer chairs.
Was there a different palette?
Entirely different. They told me about this phenomenon that they were almost totally occupied by men who loved them.
But aside from color and comfort and looking more like home, there are certain things that particularly women who travel alone could, should, perhaps must bear in mind when they check into a hotel. For example, a room that is closer to an elevator, a room on a floor where the floors are more well lighted than usual. Do you deal that into your hotel design?
Well, not necessarily for women. I mean, we must do it for everybody now. We must have well-lighted corridors, and we must have protection, all kinds of protection. I think men's idea of what is acceptable has changed. I think everybody wants more color. I think that it's a softer approach, and they don't feel it's unmasculine to like something that's beautiful.
Well, by and large, I guess it's men who are making the decisions whether or not to accept or reject your designs. And they're making it for men and women and children as well. How do you get along with all of these fellows, and how does that all work?
There's no problem once they believe in you at all. You know, you show them color boards. They now know that the palette has changed completely. And other designers have helped do that too. I mean, we're deep into the wisteria, orchid, purple, pale blue cycle. We're out of the brown. You know, we went through that strong blue and white and brown and white.
How do you deal with your clients? How involved are they in the design process?
They are very. I mean, you must take them in, and no surprises. You know, you often tell them, if you're trying to do something innovative, you have to tell them why, and you know, lead them into it. It's just what you have to do if you're selling an advertising campaign. We have to show them the furniture that we want. Frequently, they want to sit in the chairs, especially if it's a cocktail lounge. They will sit back and they'll say, "Is this a 2-martini chair?"
What's a 2-martini chair?
Like this one.
Really?
Yes, yes. No, but it has to be big enough and supportive enough.
Well, we know how effective and persuasive you can be, but I'm still trying to figure out how in the world you managed to convince a first-time developer in New York City to have a 6-story lobby. How'd you manage that one?
I just talked to him about his competition. I said, "You're starting out in this field. You are facing the great giants that have been here 50 years ahead of you. There's very little press left. It must be word of mouth. It must be a gift to the city of New York, so people will go to 56th Street between 6th and 7th to see this. And that's the greatest thing I can do for you." And I said, "It will cost you quite a lot, but I think quickly, we'll see how this works. Quickly, people will say, 'Oh, have you been there?'" It was a very strange lot. You know, it had been the old Great Northern. And it was on a block that seemed shabby to me. So we had to do something magnificent. And I said to him, "I want to do a folie for you." And it is.
And you're pleased with the results?
I'm so pleased. I really am. He said last night to me, I said, "What do people say?" And he says, they say, "Ooh la la." Well,
and he's not even French.
well, no, but Air France, you see, is now taking it on and are managing it. And I didn't know that when I was designing it, or our staff was designing it. I must say, all of us worked on that very hard.
You mentioned earlier that other than your first job, you've never applied for one, other than the first job and the letter to Mr. Helmsley about the Palace Hotel. How do you get your clients?
Well, the hotel world travels around itself, and it's a very small world. They tell each other everything. They show each other everything. They sell you, even to their competitors. Hotel design has gotten to be largely theater, largely entertainment. We're really quite theatrical without, I hope, being cheap. We do set a stage for people at great moments in their lives, I hope.
You once, in an issue of a magazine that you edited, it was soon after you became the editor of House Beautiful, and this is just about 15 years ago, 16 years ago now.
Really, has it been so long?
And you said, and I'm going to quote you if I may, "Because we feel that conformity is a deadly blanket over the land, we've dedicated this entire issue to the individualist." You decided in that issue to salute those who step beyond conformity, and you said, "Individualism, once the glorious prerogative of wealth, fame, and beauty, is now the reward of the aware." Do you still feel this way, and how and where does one get this reward?
I think you just enjoy it so much if you really perceive it.
What did you mean? What was your intent there, and how have you translated that into your design life?
Well, I think you have it's very narrow for me. I just determinedly don't do what I've ever done before. But I also don't do anything that anybody else ever did, if I can help myself. You see, I think not that we're struggling to be outrageous and outlandish. I think, but we try not to have a mark of ourselves on things. It's just an interpretation of the best we can do, either for the place or the time.
Would you like your work to be identified as a job by Sarah Tomerlin Lee?
No.
How would you like it to be known?
I just want people to think it's so beautiful.
Sarah Lee, surely you are one of the most eloquent and gracious persons ever to have joined us, and we appreciate your taking the time to come and to share your views with us.
It's been a great pleasure and a wonderful experience.
For us.
For me.
And thank you, audience, for being with us, too. I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein for Interior Design, The New Freedom. Thank you, Sarah.
Good.